So as much as I love flying jets, the Air Force takes you out of your comfort zone, if you will, out of a fighter squadron, and then they put you in what professional military education, which is it's going to get a master's essentially. And then you have to do a staff job at some point. And prior to being back here at Nellis, my staff job is I was the Deputy Executive Officer to the Commander of the United States Central Command, which is one of 6 geographic combatant commands that we have around the world. And so he was a 4-star general. And I learned more about myself and about being an officer in the United States military in the 18 months that I served under him than I had in my 18 and a half years of service leading up to that point. It was a phenomenal life experience, but one of his 4 tenets was trust your instincts. So when he would talk to his other commanders, and he's as high as you can get, right?
Yeah.
And when he would talk to his other commanders, he would say exactly that, is trust your instincts, because your instincts are what got you here, and they haven't failed you so far. Now, if you blindly trust anything, then that's a mistake in and of itself. But I am a firm believer that trusting your instincts, whether that be in a dangerous situation or whether that be judging somebody's, if they're right for the next position or whatever the case may be, your instincts 99% of the time are correct.
No doubt about it. In the context I was talking to it with Bucky, he was choosing between going to LSU or A&M to play football. And he was from Louisiana. They don't let kids get out of Louisiana. That's a very, very difficult decision for a guy like him. And he said it basically, I did all the research, did all the homework, talked to all the people. But at the end of the day, it just felt like the right place. My instincts told me it was the right place. And he was like, man, it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. And, the thing, Colonel, that I used to get hung up about was, because I think, I have an engineering degree. I really like math and stuff like that. So I have a tendency to be kind of analytical. And I think sometimes I have a tendency to be over analytical. I overanalyze stuff. And so it's not like you and I are talking about, don't do your homework, don't do your preparation. We're not saying that at all. We're saying do all that stuff. But on top of that, you got to be able to trust your gut and your instincts, right? Because at the end of the day, you can research things up, down, left, and right, but you got to make a decision. And sometimes the decision's not going to be black and white. And so what are you going to use? You're going to use your judgment and your instincts. Well, that's really cool. Well, let me ask you, Colonel, because I noticed on your resume that you worked for Combat Command. What's the proper military term for? You were talking about the general just now. What's the proper term for?
Yeah, so General Joseph Votel, he is now retired, but prior to his retirement, he was the commander of United States Central Command. And that is the way that the military parses up the world, is essentially in geographic combatant commands. And so United States Central Command essentially encompasses the Middle East, Southwest Asia, some of the not so lovely places on the planet. And so I was working directly for him, but the official term is United States Central Command. Central Command.
Okay. And the general you were working for was in charge of the entire thing. He was the top dog. And you said earlier that you learned more in 18 months than you learned in your previous 18 years. You talked about one of his rules about trusting your instincts, trusting your gut. Tell us a little bit more, if you don't mind, about what else you learned serving in that position, because this is a leadership podcast, and it's really interesting you'd say that. I'd love to hear about a few more lessons you learned.
Yeah, Brian, it was fascinating, because what is interesting about that part of the world, not only has the United States military obviously been actively engaged in war over there since even before 9/11, right? Everybody kind of equates to 9/11, but the Air Force in particular never left after the first Iraq War in 91, and we were flying Operation Northern Watch and Southern Watch before re-engaging in combat operations in Afghanistan and then subsequently Iraq. But so that area of the world, without overstating the obvious, is an extremely volatile place, and it is all about relationships. And what is fascinating about the commander of the United States Central Command, especially the one that I worked for, General Votel, was that oftentimes, to use an A&M phrase, he was the soldier, the statesman, and the knightly gentleman all at the same time, because in certain places, he was not only the senior military officer, he was the senior American statesman, and then he also had to play both sides of the coin. So he had to be a politician. He had to be, essentially a State Department representative, and they obviously had to carry the hammer, if you will, from the military side. And so really unique. And he would give these senior leader engagement to his commanders. And, one of his principles was developing relationships. And, it sounds super easy, like, oh, yeah, no kidding. But part of the developing the relationships is listening first. I think, and especially in my career field, we are very apt to just not listen and just respond, right? Sure. But part of listening is understanding the problem or understanding what's being presented to you. So, listening first, understanding, and then responding last. Because guess what? Sometimes establishing a relationship or a dialogue, you don't even have to respond, right?
Right.
Sometimes silence is good. The other piece of that puzzle is not all relationships are positive. A lot of times we think, oh, well, I have a good relationship, but that doesn't mean the relationship's good. You may be jovial with somebody, or you may be on, friendly terms, but that doesn't mean you have a good operational kind of working relationship. And I'm taking this more from kind of a military perspective than anything, but I think it applies, broad brush across basically anything that you would do in your life. Communicating effectively, man, the military, as you're well aware, is full of this hierarchy and chain of command, et cetera. But things can get lost we call it the frozen middle, man, and things can just die. Yeah. And so General Votel was very much of communicate early and often and keep it as flat as you can. So as the 4-star general, he wanted to talk to his commanders on the ground. It didn't matter if that was a captain, a lieutenant, because what he found in his 40-year career was that, the folks in that frozen middle, they may have a good idea, but I can tell you who exactly knows, and it's that first lieutenant or that company grade officer who's down on the ground in the trenches, for lack of a better term.
What a brilliant man. What a brilliant man. I mean, that's just a brilliant way of leading, because, one of the things that I've seen, there's been patterns in this podcast, Colonel, is the best leaders that I've talked to don't think they know everything. As a matter of fact, they know they don't know everything, yes. Right? And so, but what they do know, Colonel, is they know who to ask. They know where to get the information. They don't assume they know everything. I mean, what great leadership advice.
Yeah, and if you think, again, it goes back to that team concept, right? It takes every single person on the team, and I can personally tell you that if you believe that you know the answers to every question, you will fail. You will fail as a leader, no matter military, lawyer, businessman, civic leader, it doesn't matter, because nobody has the bandwidth to understand all of the finite data that's going on. And the larger the organization, the more finite the data and the larger pool of information you need to understand. And you physically can't keep your arms around it. It's the bottom line. The other piece of that communication too, Brian, is communicating the good and the bad. We all want to tell the good story, right? But, in life, there's also bad data that needs to get communicated. And, whether you are the leader, the lowest or the highest in that organization, bad news doesn't get better with time. And
great advice. Great advice.
If your boss is surprised, then you screwed up.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
I think we've all experienced that in one way or another. And then the other piece of the puzzle is, I think you have to know yourself and know how you communicate, but more importantly, know how either the leaders above you or the leaders below you or your peers, how they take communication, right? Because the way that I receive info and the way that you receive info could be completely different. And as a leader, I need to understand that. Whether you're my boss or my subordinate, I have to know how to communicate to you. And in that way, the message and the intent and the mission is clear.
Colonel, you literally said so many things right there. I'm getting chills down my spine. My head feels like it's about to explode. I mean, you have leadership literally coming out of your pores. But let me try to break down a couple of those things, if you don't mind, because I think they're so important. One of the things you said about the general you worked for soldier, statesman, knightly gentleman. For people that didn't go to A&M or not familiar with that saying, the idea is that's kind of the perfect military person. He or she is a soldier, a statesman, and a knightly gentleman or gentlewoman. And it kind of sounds like what we were talking about earlier, being well-rounded, being able to do a lot of different things well. And then you talked about listening. And, I tell my clients, for instance, before they go in and give sworn testimony, I say, you need to listen to the question, but don't listen to the question the way I listen to my wife sometimes, where I'm shaking my head, but I'm not really paying attention, right? Real, truly listening to people is a skill. And it takes work to be a good listener, because you have to be willing to shut up for a little bit and to truly pay careful attention to what the other person is saying, rather than, and I know you've experienced this before, Colonel, I know we all have, sometimes you'll be hearing something and instead of listening, you're already formulating your own response in your head, right? That's not real, that's pretend listening, right? And then the final thing you said, which I think is, which is just, one of the most important points I think any leader can do is being out there, knowing who to go to get the right information, and not presuming that you know everything about everything. So what a testament, what a great description of leadership skills